Hi everyone. Sorry I couldn't be here today. I'm at a meeting somewhere else in the building. So we're going to do notes a little bit differently. Go ahead and take out your yellow note packet and turn to page 6. We are going to be learning something new today. We're starting proofs in geometry, which it's actually tied nicely together with everything we've been doing. Congruent triangles, and you're going to keep using those same reasons, side, 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 angle, side, everything like that. So when we're talking about proving triangles congruent, we need to revisit some of the reasons that you can use. Now, notice the table that you're given. It kind of looks like a T-chart. And we have statements on one side, reasons on the other. Sometimes you'll only have to fill in the reason side, and sometimes you'll have to fill in both. Today you'll see a little bit of both. So let's go ahead and start off with the reasons that you need. One of the biggest reasons that you're always allowed to use is the given reason. So, are angles congruent? Well, check in your given, see if it's stated there. How else could angles be congruent? Well, they could be vertical angles. You could have an angle bisector, which means the angles cut into two smaller equal angles. So for that reason, we would write definition of an angle bisector. And your last reason being using parallel lines. So at some point, we may get to some where you would use alternate interior angles are congruent because of the parallel lines. But like we did earlier, we skipped those in proving triangles congruent. Now we're getting into the actual proof part where you're writing the statements and then you're writing the reasons. Just a side note, if you guys need to pause this at any time, you can pause it, replay what I said. You could go back later and listen to it. You can listen to it while you're trying to complete your homework, anything that helps. Okay, the next statement we could have is that two segments are congruent. What could be your reason to justify why segments are congruent? Well, it again could be in the given. You could also be given a segment bisector. So a bisector that cuts your segment in half. If that's the case, you'll write in the reason spot definition of a segment bisector. You could also have the definition of a midpoint. We know that if it's a midpoint, it means it's cutting the segment into two equal halves. All right, everyone should know this one. Why are two angles congruent to themselves? Or why are two segments congruent to themselves? That is the reflexive property. We will use that one a lot. Notice how it's spelled, flex, like you flex your muscles, not your reflection like in the mirror. All right, and then the last reasons that we'll use for today will be our reasons for why triangles are congruent. And we know that there's 5 of them. Side, 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 angle, side. Don't forget the congruency symbol next to it. Angle, side, angle congruency. Angle, angle, side congruency. And the most recent HL congruency. Now it may be a good idea to go back and star a few. We will use reflexive property a lot. We will use vertical angles a lot. And you definitely want to remember your reasons that are definition of a bisector, midpoint, or for either an angle or a segment. All right, moving along in the notes here. Look at example 1. Look at your given. We have angle A is congruent to angle E. Go ahead and look at the proof. Now, it's not explicitly in the T-chart where it says statements on the left and reasons on the right, but it looks like that. So our first statement is AB is congruent to ED. Mark it in your picture. AB is congruent to ED. What's your reason? Remember, you do not have special powers and you can't write anything you want in. Go back and always look at your given. That was in the given. So we just write given on the line. Same thing with our next statement. Angle A is congruent to angle E. Mark it in your picture. What's the reason that we're able to do that? Again, it was in the given. Our next statement, angle ACB is congruent to angle ECD. By looking at that picture after you mark them, you should know that reason is because vertical angles are congruent. And everything you write down, it needs to be justified. So if that helps you think of, well, what's my reason? Think of what allows you to mark them in the picture. What are they called? What's happening? And your last reason, why is triangle ABC congruent to triangle EDC? The reason here would be angle, angle, side. Remember, the side's not included in the angle. All right, example 2. Notice here, there's not any statements or any reasons written down. So we're going to do the entire proof together. Always start with your given information. So our first statement is segment BC is congruent to segment DA. Our reason? It's in the given. Mark it in the picture. BC congruent to DA. Our next statement, angle ADB is congruent to angle CBD. Look where I took that from. Again, right from the given up here. Mark it in your picture. ADB, remember the letter in the middle is the vertex. Our reason, it's in the given. Now look at that picture, that diagram over to the right. You should look here and say to yourself, I know I can mark something. You should say, I know I can mark segment BD. But you can't just write it once. It's in both triangles. So we say BD is congruent to BD. And again, one of the most common reasons here, the reflexive property. Now, looking at my pictures, or my diagram, sorry, you can see that the triangles are congruent. So we can stop the rest of our statements and go right to our proof. Rewrite the proof. It's ABD is congruent to triangle CDB. And you need a reason, not because I said so, not because it looks like it. What is one of those 5 reasons for why triangles can be congruent? In this case, it looks like side, angle, side, congruency. Now notice, your givens are always written first. Your proof is always the last statement. So you should always be able to know what you're proving because it's given to you in the beginning of the problem. All right, go ahead and flip the page over here. And here's an example of how you'll see a lot of proofs. Some information already given to you, and then you just have to fill in the rest. So let's go ahead and look here. AP is perpendicular to MB, and AB is congruent to PB. AB is congruent to PB. What does this perpendicular symbol mean? Again, it means there's going to be a right angle formed at angle B on both sides in that triangle. So, how do we know this statement's correct? How do we know angle ABM and angle PBM are right angles? Well, we know that's what it means when lines are perpendicular. So your reason is if 2 lines are perpendicular, then they form right angles. Notice we have to go one step further and say that they're congruent. We said they were right, well we know that right angles are congruent. They both equal 90 degrees. So your reason here is if two angles are right angles, then they're congruent. Why would MB be congruent to MB? We know this because of the reflexive property. And then last but not least, why is triangle MAB congruent to triangle MPB? Because of side angle side. It is not HL. The hypotenuse is not marked congruent. Okay, we're going to skip example 4 here for today. We may come back to it later, but it involves parallel lines, and we're not focusing on that today. So this last example on this page. Again, what are you given? Always start with that. Write that in your proof. Given H is the midpoint of DG. Your reason is given. What else do we know? We know angle 1 is congruent to angle 4. Again, mark that in the picture. Make sure we put given. Let's go back to that first given piece of information. What does it mean to be a midpoint? Well, it means that it cuts that big piece, DG, in half. So if it's cut in half, that means DH is congruent to HG. That will be our third statement. DH is congruent to HG. Your reason, if you don't remember, go back and look in the reasons where we started the notes. What are those options that you could put here? We'll also go back to what's in the given. It says it's a midpoint. Link the two together. That just means the reason's going to be, well, that's what happens when you have a midpoint. So the definition of a midpoint. We also have vertical angles. You cannot forget about those. If you put it in your picture, you have to write it in your proof. So these angles need to be listed with 3 letters, not just one, because there's a bunch of angles at H. So we could say angle DHF is congruent to triangle, or not to triangle, to angle. Match up the letters. GHB. Your reason, vertical angles are congruent. Now we have 3 pieces of information for each triangle. We should be able to go right to our proof, copy down what's up there. Triangle FDH is congruent to triangle BGH. What's the reason? Look at the picture. What do you see? I see 2 angles and a side. The side is in between the 2 angles. So your reason they're congruent is angle, side, angle. Go ahead and flip the page over. We have 3 examples left. It does say you get to try with such a happy face. Now, I want you to go ahead and pause this and take a couple minutes, 5, 10, however long it takes, and try and do 6, 7, and 8 on your own. You'll see some of them all you need to fill in are the reasons. Some of them you need to fill in the given. So pause. Don't keep listening to me. Miss Murphy's going to be on you like a hawk, walking around to make sure you paused it. It's not moving, and you're actually trying 6, 7, and 8. If you get stuck, then you may replay. I will put the answers on here in a few seconds. Make sure you pause and think for yourself. All right, now that you've worked on these for a little bit, go ahead and check, make sure you got your answers right, and make sure your diagrams are marked just like mine. So I'd go one problem at a time and pause it so you can make sure that you have those right answers. Here are the answers for number 6. Here are the correct answers for number 7. Make sure you're marking your diagram so you know it's side, side, side. Pause it so you can make sure you have it all. And here's the last one, example 8. Again, you had to do this one all on your own. You had some choices to help you along the way. Mark your picture, and it makes it a lot easier. All right, thank you guys for being so great and listening to this. I hope this helps in doing your homework tonight. See you guys tomorrow.